My son didn't look at me when he said it. That's the part I keep coming back to. He didn't even look at me. I had driven 4 hours to be there. 4 hours in my old Buick with the heater that only works on the left side, stopping once for gas and once because my knees needed stretching. I was wearing my good navy dress, the one I saved for funerals and graduations. I had my hair done the day before. I had baked the lemon pound cake he always asked for as a boy, wrapped it in foil, set it carefully on the passenger seat like it was something precious. When I walked into that house, his wife's house, really, the one her parents bought them, my son was standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand, talking to her father. He glanced over, smiled the way you smile at someone you didn't expect to stay long, and then his wife saw what I was carrying. Not the cake, the envelope. I'd been saving for 31 years, started the account the month after my husband passed, when my son was 9 years old and I was 42 and working the early shift at the hospital laundry. 6 days a week, 4:30 in the morning, home by 2. Every week I put something aside. Not much at first, $40, $60, some weeks only $20, when the car needed something or the water heater gave out. But I never stopped, not once in 31 years. The account was in a credit union most people had never heard of. I never talked about it. Never told my son, never told my sister, never told anyone. I kept the statement folded in the back of my Bible where it had been since 1998. I brought the envelope to his Thanksgiving dinner because I genuinely believed that it was time. He was 40 years old. His wife had just lost her job. They had a mortgage. I thought I could help. I thought that was what mothers did. I handed it to him near the dining room table before we sat down, while her parents were still in the kitchen. I said, "I have something for you. I've been saving this for a long time." He opened it while his wife watched over his shoulder. She saw the account number, she saw the balance, and I watched her face go from curious to something else entirely, something cold and calculating that she didn't bother to hide. My son looked up at me, and that's when he said it, still not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom, why didn't you tell me about this before? We could have used this. We needed this." Not "thank you." Not "I can't believe you did this." Just "we could have used this," past tense, like I had failed him by not handing it over sooner. His wife said, very quietly, more to herself than anyone, a hospital laundry worker with that kind of money. That doesn't make any sense. And her father, who had come in from the kitchen without my noticing, laughed. A short, dismissive sound. He said, "She probably just put the wrong number of zeros." They laughed, my son included. A small laugh quickly covered, but I heard it. I put the envelope back in my purse. I said, "Excuse me, I need some air." I walked to the front door, picked up my coat from the hook, and left. I didn't say goodbye. I drove home in the dark with the heat blowing only on the left side and the pound cake still in foil on the passenger seat. And I didn't cry until I was past the county line because I didn't want to have to pull over. Quick question before I go on. Have you ever done something generous for someone you love and had it turned into something ugly? Leave a comment. I read every single one. And subscribe if you want to hear how this ends, because it does end, just not the way any of them expected. Let me back up and tell you who I am, because it matters. My name is Lorraine. I'm 67 years old. I live in the same house I've lived in for 38 years. A 2-bedroom on Caldwell Street in a town most people have never heard of. I have a vegetable garden in the back and a porch that needs repainting and a cat named Mr. Birch who is extremely opinionated about mealtimes. My husband Gerald died of a heart attack in October of 1993. He was 44 years old. Our son Weston was 9. We had about $1,200 in savings, a used Ford pickup, and a mortgage with 11 years left on it. I want you to understand what that felt like. Not the grief. I won't try to put words to that, but the practical reality of it. 11 years left on a mortgage, a 9-year-old who needed shoes and school lunches, and eventually, one day, college. And me, a woman who had worked hospital laundry for 3 years and had no degree and no family nearby and no plan, because the plan had always been Gerald, and now Gerald was gone. I remember sitting at the kitchen table the night after the funeral, after everyone had gone home, and doing the math on a piece of notebook paper, over and over. Every column came out the same. I didn't sleep that night, but by morning I had a different piece of paper with a different kind of math on it, a smaller number. How much I could put aside each week if I cut everything that could be cut and kept everything that couldn't. I called the credit union on my lunch break and opened the account with $40. $40. I want you to think about that when I tell you the balance 31 years later. I got a second job in 1997, cleaning offices 3 nights a week. Weston was 13 by then, old enough to be home alone, sensible enough that I trusted him. I told him I was picking up extra shifts. I didn't tell him about the account. I don't know exactly why. Partly because he was a child, partly because I'd grown superstitious about it, the way you get superstitious about things you need to survive. I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted to keep adding to it. I paid off the mortgage in 2006. I kept putting money in the account. I stopped cleaning offices in 2009 when my knees started giving me trouble, but by then I had gotten a better position at the hospital, administrative intake, not laundry, and the contributions got larger, not dramatically, but steadily. Weston graduated college in 2007. I paid cash for his last 2 years when his scholarship ran short. I told him I'd been saving up. He said, "Mom, you're incredible." He hugged me in the parking lot after the ceremony, and I thought my chest might break open from loving him. He met Kristen in 2012. Married her in 2014. Her parents, her father Dwight and her mother Patricia, are the kind of people who categorize everyone they meet within the first 60 seconds. What do you do? What do you drive? Where do you live? I watched Dwight do the calculation on me at the rehearsal dinner. Hospital laundry, then intake clerk, small town, old Buick. He was pleasant. The way you're pleasant to someone you've already decided doesn't count. Weston and Kristen settled into a life that looked the way her parents wanted it to look. New construction, 2 cars, the right neighborhood. When the mortgage got harder after she lost her position at the marketing firm, Dwight stepped in with a loan. It came with opinions attached. Everything from Dwight came with opinions attached. I kept my distance. I visited for holidays. I brought food and I listened and I asked about their lives and I kept my opinions to myself. That was the deal I'd made with myself. I would be present and I would be useful and I would not interfere. What I didn't know, what I found out much later, was that Kristen had been telling Weston for years that I was a burden. Not in those words. More like, your mother is fragile. Your mother depends on you emotionally. Your mother is going to need us to support her eventually. She had constructed a version of me in his mind, a woman to be managed rather than known. I didn't find this out from Weston. I found it out from his cousin Adele, who I've known since she was born, who pulled me aside at a family reunion in 2022 and said, "Lorraine, I need to tell you something you're not going to want to hear." I filed it away. I didn't change my plans. I still thought the money was the right thing to do, the generous thing, the final thing I could give him from all those years of getting up at 4:30 in the morning. That was my mistake. Not saving the money, believing that generosity could fix something that had already been decided. I drove home from that Thanksgiving dinner and I sat in my kitchen for a long time with the pound cake still in its foil on the counter. I wasn't angry yet. I was something quieter than angry, the way cold is quieter than fire. I took the envelope out of my purse and I looked at the statement again, the real one, not the one I'd brought to show Weston. I had brought a copy, just the summary page, no account details. I had planned to give him the full information once we'd talked, once I'd seen his face and known it was right. His wife had seen the balance on that summary. She didn't know the account number. She didn't know which institution. She knew the number, and that was enough to change her face. I thought about that for a long time. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Estelle Marchetti. I've used her for small things over the years. A deed transfer, Gerald's estate, nothing complicated. But she was smart and careful, and she answered her own phone, which I had always considered a good sign in a person. I told her what had happened. Not the emotional parts, just the facts. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lorraine, how long ago did you open this account?" 31 years, I said. "And your son is not a co-owner? Not a beneficiary on record?" "No." Another silence. "Then, good. Keep it that way for now. Don't make any changes yet. And don't mention it to anyone." I said I wasn't planning to. She said she wanted to look into a few things. I went back to my regular life. I went to work. I tended my garden through the cold snap in December. I called Weston once, the week after Thanksgiving, and he answered, and we talked for 11 minutes about nothing in particular. He didn't mention the envelope. He didn't apologize. Neither did I. I had been a mother for 40 years. I knew how to wait. Estelle called me in January. She had something she wanted to discuss, she said. Not about the account specifically, but about something she'd come across while she was looking into Weston's financial situation at my request. I hadn't asked her to look into his financial situation. I told her so. She paused. "You didn't ask me to look into it directly," she said, "but you told me about the loan from his father-in-law. I wanted to understand the full picture." What she had found was that Dwight's loan to Weston and Kristen, $300,000 in 2019, the year they bought the house, had been structured not as a loan, but as a partial ownership stake. Dwight owned 40% of their home. Weston didn't know, or if he knew, hadn't understood it fully. The documentation was dense and had been prepared by Dwight's attorney, not anyone representing Weston. I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Does my son know what he signed?" Estelle said, "That's a question for a conversation you may want to have with him." I said, "I'll think about it." I thought about it for 6 weeks. It was a Tuesday in February when I drove back to their house. I didn't call ahead. I arrived at 10 in the morning when I knew Kristen would be at her new job, and Dwight and Patricia's Tuesday tennis game ran until noon. Weston answered the door in his work clothes. He looked surprised. Then, something that might have been guilty, I said, "I need 30 minutes and a cup of coffee." He let me in. I sat across from him at the kitchen island. Kristen's kitchen, all white marble and unlived in, and I put 2 things on the counter: Estelle's summary of the ownership document and my savings account statement, the full one, account number, institution, and the balance as of January 31st. He looked at the first document for a long time. I watched his face work through it. Then he looked at the second. He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough that I heard the refrigerator hum. He said, "Mom," I said, "let me finish." I told him everything: the $40 in 1993, the second job, the mortgage payoff, the math on the notebook paper the night after his father's funeral. I told him about Adele at the reunion and what she'd said. I told him I had sat in my kitchen on Thanksgiving night with his pound cake on the counter and decided I needed to understand the situation clearly before I did anything. He didn't speak. His face had gone through several things and landed on something I hadn't seen before. Something young, like the boy he used to be when he'd done something he couldn't take back and knew it. I said, "I am not angry with you. I want you to know that. I understand that the person you've been living next to has been telling you a story about me for a long time, and I understand that it's hard to unknow a story once you've believed it, but I need you to understand something now. That account, those 31 years, that was for you. It was always for you. And I was prepared to give it to you until I watched your face in that dining room, and I knew you had already decided what I was worth." He said, "Mom," I said, "I'm not finished." I told him about Estelle. I told him that the ownership document could be challenged, that he had options he didn't know he had, and that I was prepared to help him. Not with the account, not yet, but with legal fees, with getting him real representation, with making sure he understood what he had actually signed. He asked me why. I said, "Because you're my son. Not because you deserve it right now. Because you're my son, and I have been getting up at 4:30 in the morning since 1993 for exactly this reason." He put his face in his hands. I let him. "I want to be honest with you because I don't think these stories are worth telling if you're not honest in them." My son cried at that kitchen island. He apologized. He said the things you say when you've been caught not being the person you wanted to be. I believed him, most of it. Not all of it, but most. I did not hand him the account that day. I told him, I need to see who you are when your wife comes home. I need to see what you do with what I've told you, and then we'll talk about the rest. I drove home. Mr. Birch was waiting at the door, irritated about something. I fed him and made myself a real cup of coffee, not the gas station kind, and I sat on my porch even though it was February and cold. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Steady. Not happy, not sad. Just completely, solidly steady. Weston called Estelle's office 2 days later and asked for a referral to a real estate attorney. He didn't tell Kristen he was doing it. He didn't tell Dwight. He told me on the phone, his voice careful and low. I said, okay. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. I mean it. I said, okay. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. I mean it. I said, I know. Show me. 3 months later, after conversations I wasn't part of and documents I wasn't shown, Weston had a lawyer of his own for the first time since buying that house. The ownership stake situation was being formally reviewed. Kristen was not pleased. There were, from what I understood, significant conversations, but those weren't mine to witness. What I did witness, Weston driving up to my house on a Saturday in April, by himself, without calling first. He knocked on the door. When I opened it, he was holding a lemon pound cake from the bakery downtown, not mine. He's never been able to bake. But he'd tried to find something close, he said. I thought I'd return the gesture. I let him in. We sat on the porch, the one that needs repainting, and we talked for 3 hours. Real talking, not the 11-minute kind. He told me things. I told him things. I told him about Gerald doing the math at our own kitchen table back in 1985, the year before Weston was born, figuring out how long it would take to pay off the house. He'd never known his father did that. He hadn't known a lot of things. At the end, as he was leaving, he stopped on the porch steps and turned around. He said, the account. Mom, you don't have to. I said, I know I don't have to. That's the point. I said, give me a little more time. Let me see the rest of this. He nodded. He walked to his car. He looked for just a moment, like the boy who used to ask me to leave the hall light on. I'm still waiting. Not passively. I'm talking to Estelle. I'm watching. I'm thinking about what the right thing looks like once you know all the facts. The account is still there. 31 years of 4:30 mornings and second jobs and not touching it, not once. Some people hear a story like this and they want to know if I won, if Kristen lost her grip on my son, if Dwight had to give back his 40%, if I handed over that statement at a dramatic moment and watched someone's face fall. I don't think that's the right question. The right question is, when you spent 31 years building something in silence and the moment comes to use it, what do you use it for? I used it to tell my son the truth about what I had done for him. I used it to make sure he had a real lawyer. I used it to sit on a cold porch in February and feel, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly who I had always been trying to be. Whatever comes next, the money, the house, the conversation still left to have, I'll figure out with the same thing I've always used. A piece of notebook paper, a number that's honest, and enough patience to wait until morning. That's all I've ever needed. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. We're building something here, a community of people who believe that quiet strength is still strength. Leave a comment and tell me, what have you built in silence that the people around you didn't see? I'll be reading. I've been thinking about what actually happened in that dining room. Not the drama of it, not Kristen's face going cold or Dwight's short laugh or my son not quite meeting my eyes. I've been thinking about the years before that moment, because that's where the real story is. Every choice has a cost, and every cost accumulates. When I put $40 into that account in 1993, I was making a choice about who I was going to be. Not for anyone watching. Nobody was watching. I was choosing alone at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, whether I was going to be defeated by the thing that had happened to me, or whether I was going to build something anyway. That choice didn't announce itself. It just sat there, quietly compounding, the same way the account did. What happened at Thanksgiving was also a choice, and it also had a cost. Weston chose, in that moment, to laugh with the people who had decided what I was worth. He chose belonging over honesty. I understand it. I'm not 23 anymore. I know how hard it is to stand against the current of a room, but understanding something doesn't change what it costs. That choice cost him something real, not the money, something harder to name, the version of himself he'd been raised to be. What I've learned, after 67 years of making choices in the dark when nobody was looking, is that integrity is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's what you do on the Tuesday mornings when nothing is dramatic and nobody is watching, and it would be very easy to skip it. I practiced it for 31 years at 4:30 in the morning, and I never once felt heroic doing it. I felt tired, mostly. Sometimes lonely, but I kept going because the alternative, stopping, giving up on the version of the future I was trying to build, wasn't actually an alternative. Not for me, not for Weston. Trisha, one of my old colleagues from the intake desk, used to say that you can tell a lot about a person by what they do when they think the answer is no. I think about that. When Gerald died and the math said impossible, I said, let me try anyway. When my knees gave out and the second job ended, I said, let me find another way. That's not stubbornness. That's the quiet, unglamorous work of being a person who doesn't quit on the things that matter. Weston is learning that now, slowly in his own way. When he drove up to my house in April with that bakery pound cake, he was practicing something. When he called Estelle's office without telling his wife, he was practicing something. It's not a complete story yet, but it's a beginning, and beginnings count. What I want, if this story means anything to you, is for you to think about what you're practicing in the quiet. Not what you're announcing, not what you're performing, what you're actually doing when nobody sees. That's the thing that will be there when the moment comes. That's the thing that will hold. The account is still there, 31 years of it, and I'm still deciding what it's for. But I know this. Whatever I do with it will be an honest choice made with clear eyes in the full light of what I actually know. That's all I ever wanted to teach my son. I think, finally, he might be learning it.